I want to talk about an idea that has been discussed at great length in the film industry: shooting multiple movies back to back. Now, the rationale behind why I want to rattle on about this proposition of multiple movies being shot back to back together is mainly because I have been pondering lately about the live action Dune movie and how Dune is supposed to be this grand start to a potentially rich and strong cinematic franchise, like Lord of the Rings, which I'm going to use as a prime example here in just a moment. I thought to myself, Dune is meant to be a two-part installment covering the dimensions of the first book, right? So shouldn't movies such as the likes of Dune, that is packed with complex lore and mythology, be shot back to back? It's only natural, right? But then I pondered on the uncertainty that this COVID-19 pandemic has wrought. Not many people were that eager to jump out of bed, buy a ticket when they're losing paycheck after paycheck because of unemployment, and sit in a theater which might potentially expose them to the coronavirus itself. As a result of that, chances were that Dune wasn't going to make the box office quota that they needed in order to justify the making of a sequel, which means that if Dune Part 1 and 2 got filmed together, there is always that likelihood that Part 1 will be a massive flop in the box office, rendering Part 2 an unjustified expense. At the same time, shooting multiple films back to back is more cost efficient, and here's why that is. Because typically, after a movie has wrapped production, the set gets taken down, the costumes get shelved in a vault somewhere. If the studio has, let's say, rented a location in Iowa, they have to give it back to the original owners of the plot in the location. So if hypothetically, that is, Dune wants to get filming for part 2, then they're going to have to repeat this whole process of finding a location to conduct their filming. And chances are it might not be the exact same place where they filmed most of their scenes featured in the previous movie, likely the first installment. Therefore, they'll have to go somewhere new, and they're going to have to hire new costume designers in case they want to illustrate a new look for the character, because after all, it is still a sequel. It often requires a fresh take on the character of interest and demands extra costume work. Whereas if Dune shot back to back with part 2 scenes already in the books, then they don't have to bear most of the extra costs that are associated with starting production all over again, which would actually suck if the first movie has been successful and now they're going to have to retain what made the first movie successful, but we're going to have to start over from scratch. And maybe, just maybe, there's a chance that because they're essentially filming one massive movie, the quality might deteriorate. Because as the saying goes, sometimes, or most of the time, you don't win the lottery twice. The production isn't done, and we got to, they need to find a way to continue it while maintaining consistency. Because let's say, this actually happened with Star Wars The Force Awakens. They've filmed them separately. We didn't film it all into one trilogy. And they had to pick up where The Force Awakens left off in The Last Jedi. And that may have been why we had this consistency error in the Star Wars sequel trilogy. If they were to film back to back, they would have got to keep the location and not have to pay twice or more to find a new one. And they get to also design costumes well in advance for characters that need to look different, rather than end production in the first movie and then after 3 years, they call the designer and for whatever reasons he or she says something like, "Sorry, I'm not available." And the studio ends up having to pay more for a designer that would typically cost more. Again, all of these inconveniences might be very well avoidable with the option to shoot multiple movies back to back. Because remember, the market, especially in the film industry, is rapidly evolving, and that includes the costs for production. You never know what's going to happen 3 years from then. So filming back to back would be a safety measure that I think most studios would go well to implement. And that's why, you're going to hear some of that as I share my overall opinions of whether or not I believe that a movie being shot back to back is a convenient production method. First and foremost, I perceive this particular method to be a formula of success for a movie franchise because history has proven now and again that the most award-winning trilogies were shot back to back. Allow me to reference Exhibit B, which is Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. Lord of the Rings is obviously very successful because it won multiple awards from Best Music at the Academy Awards. Best Cinematography, well bloody earned for a matter of fact. The People's Choice Award for Favorite Movie. You get the point. Lord of the Rings was filmed back to back in its 438 days of filming in New Zealand. And the same goes true with the Hobbit trilogy. But I want to stick with Lord of the Rings as my primary example here. And because I want to re-emphasize again that shooting back to back for a movie is convenient. Not only because of past history, but also the Lord of the Rings Fellowship of the Ring was luckily a hit. And when the first movie is a hit, it just happens to be that there have been 2 other movies pre-filmed. The studio is most probably then going to make a lot of bank because the sequel will come out as soon as the next year, resulting in increased market share, and increased market share is indeed always peachy for a studio to maintain first and foremost. Another thing I want to talk about when it comes to the advantage of shooting back to back. Actors, because believe it or not, they're human beings and not robots, they age over time. So shooting back to back will maintain the consistency in how, the wrinkles on an actor's skin would look. You know what I'm saying? I want to know what you're saying now about this topic. Therefore, I want to ask you this question. What are your opinions on whether or not a movie should be shot back to back? I mean, we've seen with the success of Lord of the Rings, the success it might bring for a studio. And you might maybe have seen the missed opportunity for Dune, because now it's going to have to keep people waiting for Dune Part 2, because they didn't shoot back to back. Anyway, are there other ways for a movie to be successful? Or are you content with the filming production method being proposed here on this segment of the Cinema Courtroom Show? Whatever it is that you think, let me know in the comment section below or our Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom.